This program is designed to provide a rapid, safe, and successful response to these chaotic situations, which definitely require planning and preparation. 2, the likelihood of a mass shooting incident is low, but public safety officials must prepare for these situations. And 3, recent mass shooting incidents and active shooter incidents across the country and across the world have demonstrated the need for local, state, and federal resources to prepare for these situations. In these type of situations, fire and EMS must definitely be prepared for several reasons. 1, the number of casualties that may be involved. The fire department will either be the lead or a support role in dealing with those number of casualties. Number 2, a high number of these incidents have involved explosives and/or fires, and the fire department would be the lead in that response. And number 3, any type of response like this in a community does require a unified command approach to deal with those situations, and fire and EMS would be part of that. The guidelines and procedures discussed in this presentation should not replace common sense and experience, because it is impossible to plan for every type of situation that could occur. Also, new best practices, lessons learned, and training becomes available on an ongoing basis. So it's very important to update your planning and training efforts. And one location in every jurisdiction where you can find those updated training and planning efforts is to work with your law enforcement agencies in that unified command setting. When they're conducting training, fire and EMS can be involved in a support role. When we conduct exercises, all these agencies must work together to plan for these situations. The purpose of this course is to, number 1, familiarize first responders and command staff about trends in active shooter mass shooting incidents. Number 2, to help them understand the nature of current and emerging threats that we may face in the field. Number 3, suggest those resources, plans, and training that will help minimize loss of life in these situations. The course is not meant as a complete training in and of itself. There are many good organizations and instructors out there that can help provide training and planning to assist your agency. And the goal is not really trying to tell you how to train and plan, but rather what to train and plan for. Please remember that the information provided in this presentation should only be used as a guideline, and that you need to utilize your agency's procedures and guidelines in responding to these types of situations. It appears that today's bad guys, criminals and terrorists, are more determined, violent, and heavily armed than ever before, and we as public safety agencies must prepare for those situations. Crisis situations such as terrorist events, criminal attacks, threats, active shooters appear to be occurring with an alarming frequency. No 2 incidents are ever the same. Factors ranging from the shooter's motive, the shooter's weapon, the location, the number of individuals in the area, the law enforcement response, we all have an input into the outcome. In today's world, the threats that we face as responders have obviously changed over the past 20 or 30 years. Incidents such as Columbine, Virginia Tech, 9/11, Oklahoma City have shown that even fire and EMS will have an essential role to play in these responses. Many organizations have historically regarded safety and security as a low priority rather than an important function and responsibility. This is what we've called the spare tire mentality in the past. This sense of security and complacency has been shattered by recent events, such as Virginia Tech and the incidents in Mumbai, India. One example of this mentality is U.S. schools extensively guard against fire, with fire codes, fire drills, fire prevention, building codes. Yet not one child has died in the United States in a school fire in over 25 years. And this excludes dorm fires. Well over 200 deaths have occurred by active shooters in the same time period. So we need to recognize in planning for these events that the preparation and training that we try to conduct does meet with stiff resistance and denial, both from agencies and from our private entities in the community. So it's our job to try to explain these issues and work with those locations to plan and train for these situations. As public safety agencies prepare to work with their community partners, they should be prepared to meet resistance and denial. One of the reasons for that issue is that many organizations, including businesses and schools, may deny the fact that there is potential of violence in their community. and they may not be used to this threat. So it's one of our responsibilities to show that the threat exists and to show some options on how they can plan and prepare for those type of situations. One possibility that public safety agencies can use to reach out to their community partners, such as businesses, schools, colleges, is when an actual incident occurs anywhere in the United States and it is in the news and the media, is to utilize that time frame to reach out to those community partners, because at that time they will be aware and may have an interest versus not being receptive to your planning efforts. One of the first steps that any community, large or small, can do to prepare for these incidents is to bring your key agencies together. Law enforcement agencies, fire and EMS, emergency management, your schools, your hospitals, your colleges and universities, or any other essential community partners. And also, due to the number of locations in every community, it is impossible to prepare and train every one of these locations for a mass shooting or active shooter incident. What each community, large or small, can do is select 5 or 10 top locations in your community. This could include schools, colleges, universities, high-profile businesses, large venues, and let's assign an individual from each agency to work with that jurisdiction or that location to help them with their planning and training efforts, to build the networking, and so they can see that familiar face as you go forward with these planning and training efforts. Fire, EMS, law enforcement, school systems, and all other officials share some of the same priorities during a mass shooting active shooter incident, and this includes life safety and incident stabilization. We all share those same goals during any type of critical incident response. Planning and interagency cooperations for these type of situations are very critical and very important to the response. Also, these mass shooting active shooter incidents can occur in urban, rural, suburban, metro areas, so no jurisdiction will be totally safe from these type of responses. A very important step is to bring all your key agencies together, including law enforcement, fire, EMS, emergency management, your school systems, and your hospitals, to discuss this specific type of situation, to make sure that there is continuity of all the plans and training that is ongoing. Also, every jurisdiction, big or small, should have some type of multi-agency planning group, including a terrorism task force or multi-hazard task force of some type. This group may be an excellent foundation to bring this issue or topic before to help in those planning, training, and exercising efforts. Preparation is the key to a mass shooting active shooter incident, and that includes a very clear ideas of your actions before the incident ever occurs. The first step in your preparation is review of your agency's guideline and procedures, if you have those, on responding to these situations. Also, as with any multi-hazard assessment and planning process, it is very important to exercise your plan, either with a functional exercise or a tabletop exercise, which will bring all those key agencies together to test those functions and those guides that they've provided in that planning effort. One way to conduct this exercise process, if you do not have a good relationship with some of the agencies in your community, is to reach out to your local emergency management office. Each jurisdiction should have some type of emergency management function, whether a full-time or part-time staff in any type of jurisdiction, big or small. Emergency management will have those relationships with all the key agencies and partners in the community and may have already conducted training and exercises. So it's very important to reach out to your local emergency management to help you in that planning, training, and exercising efforts. School resource officers are a great point of contact for fire and EMS agencies. Number one, they're very familiar with both the students and the staff of any given school. Number two, they can provide you maps and keys and information on a location if you're doing planning, training, or exercises at that location. And number three, they will be able to also reach back to their agency to help you in your planning and training efforts. Another way to ensure that schools and colleges and other businesses are prepared in your jurisdiction is to ensure they have a plan in place. There are still many schools and businesses that have no safety or multi-hazard plan in place. So one way that you can better prepare your agency is to work with that location to build their plan. Also, do you know what the code for a lockdown is in your school system? And what would you do if you're on site and a lockdown occurs? Or if you respond to that situation, what are your roles and responsibilities? So be very familiar with lockdown procedures in your school system. Another issue that has come up in many actual incidents is being able to identify rooms from the exterior of a building. Schools and colleges and high-profile businesses may be large facilities or buildings. And so, example, if you're told there's an injury in room 5A, do you know where 5A is? And can you identify that building or that room from the outside of the building? Also, if you rely on other agencies, you must train together prior to an incident occurring. One way you can help prepare your community for these type of situations too is ensure that every business, every school, every facility has a crisis kit, or what's called a black box. It's very important that these boxes are updated and ready for immediate use. These kits should, number one, be in a location that is readily accessible to staff. That doesn't mean locked in an outside office, locked off site, or where nobody can find it. But those kits need to be readily accessible so the staff of that location can maintain, transport, and keep that crisis kit up to date. When a location has a crisis kit, they should have designated staff responsible for taking care of the kit. So whoever's in charge of that kit, when a facility is locked down, there's a fire drill, a tornado drill, they should become familiar with and used to grabbing the crisis kit and taking it with them in case of any type of emergency. These kits must be removed for consistency every time there is a drill, because remember, how you train is how you fight. So we need to make sure that schools and colleges and other businesses utilizing a crisis kit maintain this kit and keep it up to date and utilize it when they're doing their training and drills. Also, we need to have a backup kit. One example locally that we had occur here is we had a high school catch fire, and guess where their crisis kit was? It was in the school that burned down. So we need to have a backup kit at another location if a school catches fire or if a school is locked down, so that you have access to that information that is available in a crisis kit. We also need to ensure that every location has a crisis kit, that there is a deputy or backup individual responsible for that kit. Example, whoever the key person is who knows where the kit's at, has the keys to the kit, knows what's in the kit, they may be on vacation the day an incident occurs. So we should have somebody else, an alternate, responsible for maintaining this kit and knowing where it's at and keeping it secured. There is no specific list or guidelines on what you need to put into a crisis kit. That is going to be up to each jurisdiction and each agency and each school system. A couple of recommendations include, let's have some keys in a crisis kit, spare keys to different doors. We all know we can breach doors, but if you have to breach over 100 doors, that will take a tremendous amount of time. So just having access to some keys put into a locked up crisis kit are very important. Let's have diagrams of the location, whether it's a campus or building. Let's have maps. Let's have our escape routes identified. Let's have student, staff, and employee rosters for a location, including photos. This can either be in a book or on discs, though that does take up a tremendous amount of information. This is good information to have. Also, let's have lists of students with special needs if you have that issue in your school system. All this information can be put into the crisis kit. Blueprints, maps of the surrounding areas, overhead aerial shots, you can get that from such free services as Google. Put all that information in the kit if you think you need it. Also, take it a little farther. Where are the fire alarms shut off, the sprinkler shut off, the water valve shut off, the power shut off, utilities, gas lines, cable television. Put first aid kits, radios, phone books, put any information inside the crisis kit that you think would be important for that location or for your jurisdiction. And as a responder, you know when you respond to a location and you can ask them for that crisis kit. If they can bring the crisis kit to your command post, that's going to help you in your response tremendously on any type of situation, including a mass shooting or active shooter. As a responder, if you respond to a location that has a crisis kit available, this crisis kit will make your response much more efficient because you will now have access to all this key information. So the more jurisdictions, the more locations, the more schools that you can ensure they have a crisis kit available, you are actually helping yourself and your response if you ever have to respond to some type of critical situation. During your fire inspections, during your walkthroughs, during your planning and training efforts with any location that has a crisis kit, you need to ensure that they update their kit. If they put the kit together 3 years ago, that information inside may be different, especially if it's students, staff, and employee rosters. Also, if they have the radios and/or cell phones, they need to ensure that those are charged, up to date, and work on a monthly basis. During your planning and training efforts for a mass shooting, active shooter incident, you need to start thinking about resources. If a law enforcement agency comes to you during the response and asks to borrow a fire truck, will you provide that? If they ask to borrow a ladder truck, will you provide that to them for the response? Also, law enforcement may need fire and EMS coverage during a response to this situation. Even if you're not directly involved, you may be there in a support or standby role. They may also need breaching tools, ladders, skeds, backboards, first aid kits, fire extinguishers. Will your agency be able to provide those to them? Will they be able to provide just-in-time training? How can we make those resource requests happen in a smooth and efficient manner? It's very important that you identify these resource requests and issues prior to an incident occurring, and this will take place during your exercises. And the reason why I say that is I dealt with an actual exercise where the information and the resources that were requested were not allowed to flow for various reasons, and that provided a big roadblock to the response. So we need to make sure we address these issues during that planning and training effort. And if your plan says you will provide equipment to law enforcement, will that actually take place, and has that been discussed? So when the incident occurs, that's not the first time your agency has heard about that request. Some additional resources that may be required is the tactical medics. Also, you may need to set up triage areas. Fire EMS may be doing triage for the victims of an incident. That may need to be set up at a different location than where the incident's taking place. Also, law enforcement may need to provide Overwatch. This means providing protection to those fire and EMS responders going into that hot zone or into that crisis situation. There is a tremendous need and an immediate need for all the agencies to work in a coordinated effort during one of these responses, and that cannot be stressed enough. After the crisis kit, another way to ensure that facilities and schools and other locations are prepared for some type of incident is to ensure they have some type of emergency operations plan. And there are different templates available out there, but as long as they have some type of plan for that location. This needs to address all hazards, from tornadoes to terrorism to floods to power outages, but it definitely needs to include workplace violence and active shooter incidents. They need to, number one, train their staff to be familiar with that plan. Just because the individual writes the plan and has not shared it with anybody else in that school or business, that's not providing a good resource. So they need to ensure that everyone in that business is familiar with what that emergency plan is, and that you're familiar with that emergency plan. So when you respond to that location, you know what steps they'll be taking. And in school systems, it's a good idea to make sure that students, if they're old enough, understand what their needs are and what some of those parts of the plan may require of them. That doesn't mean that you need to share the entire plan with the student body, but students do have a role to play. So we need to make sure that those locations are sharing some of that information with the students. Some information that you can provide to a school or other location is to make sure they understand the difference between lockdowns and evacuations, and they do have a few options available, and you need to know what those options are. Number one, that they need to address in their plan and you need to make sure it's clear to them, and it's very simple, but sometimes the simple steps are forgotten, is if some type of dangerous situation occurs, they need to move staff and students and employees away from that. So move away from danger is the first thing we can address in our plan. Number two, if there is a lockdown, when do they do that? They need to plan for that because every situation can be different. So when do they lock down, or what we call shelter in place? That occurs by them going into a location, into a room, locking the door, turning off the lights, and getting out of sight if possible. So you need to understand what's occurring in a location during one of these incidents. This should be taking place inside that location during a mass shooting, active shooter incident. Also, if staff and visitors can leave the building, that is always an option. They can always evacuate a building if necessary, if they can safely do that. Or if there's several buildings involved and they can safely move away from the danger building, that is an option, but that depends on each jurisdiction and what their planning efforts involve. It is obviously very essential that law enforcement, fire, and EMS need to train together prior to these incidents. that they all have a role to play in these responses. Also, the site of an incident or some type of disaster is not the place to try out new ideas, new teams, new equipment, and new concepts. That's why we need to have training and exercises prior to the actual incident occurring. A final note on training and exercises in an actual response: if the security of fire and EMS is ever in question, do not try those type of tactics. Whether you're going into the hot zone or you're supporting law enforcement, we need to ensure that the security of fire and EMS is always looked after. One way we can help as public safety and help prepare these locations, such as schools and businesses, is they need to build a prevention environment. And what that means is they need to be vigilant for signs of possible security threats or issues or concerns. They need to have procedures in place for both staff and students to report these suspicious behaviors. How do they report that? Who do they report that to? Also, there needs to be awareness in that environment for suspicious people, activities, or items, and how do they report those? They need to encourage their staff and students to report all these type of different issues so that we're not trying to play catch up after an incident has occurred. Prevention is the #1 priority to deal with these situations. The best thing that they can do is they need to build a crisis management team. A school can do this, a college can do this, a business can do this. Whether they have 10 employees or 10,000, they need to build that crisis management team, because that's who you will work with on your plans and your training. The crisis management team is who will build that crisis kit, and that crisis management team is who you will work with and interface with when you have an incident occur. In numerous mass shooting and active shooter incidents, responders have come across improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. It's very important that first responders should not attempt to approach, move, handle, or disarm any type of IED or any suspected IED. This needs to be done by trained and equipped bomb squad personnel. Multi-agency pre-planning is critical for these type of situations. First arriving units for fire and EMS will have a drastic effect on the progress of the incident. Those first-in units must quickly and safely conduct that initial scene size-up or that windshield survey and provide that information to all other incoming agencies. Also, fire and EMS need to be reminded that there is a difference between law enforcement is on scene and scene is secure. And that is something you will need to work out with your local law enforcement agencies, so you have an understanding of what they mean by those statements if you respond in any type of situation where those statements are made to you prior to your arrival. Also, when possible, fire and EMS should remain in staging areas until the scene is secured. But the difference between a mass shooting and active shooter incident and your normal shooting or stabbing or fight type of situation is a mass shooting active shooter incident may take several hours prior to that scene being cleared or provided that scene is safe. So this is where the difference between a normal response and a mass shooting active shooter response needs to be addressed in your planning and training efforts. Some key items that need to take place during a response include establishing that command post. And you need to understand how law enforcement will respond with their contact and rescue teams. You need to talk to them and have an understanding of what exactly that means. But someone needs to immediately establish that command post and establish a unified command with the other responding agencies. We need to be able to communicate with those law enforcement contact and rescue teams who will be on site and inside the facility dealing with the situation. Also, law enforcement will need to deploy responding officers for perimeter security, dealing with friends and family, supporting witnesses, and all the other items. You need to understand how law enforcement will respond to these situations. Also, fire and medical resources will need to be deployed immediately and need to plan that and stage those resources appropriately. Also, you need to be prepared to contain spectators, family, and media that will arrive on scene. These are some of the key bullets that will need to take place almost immediately upon designating that command post. Incident scenes that are spread over a large area, such as a school, a campus, or a mall, may need to be quickly divided into smaller branches or divisions to make them more manageable for your response so that you can identify safe areas, which areas have been cleared. This can at times be very difficult in a large location where some of these incidents have taken place. Also, in past incidents, responders will initially run into fleeing victims that are leaving the scene, and you need to be prepared for that. Responding vehicles will always attract fleeing victims, whether you're an ambulance, a fire truck, or a law enforcement vehicle. And those first-in units may have a difficult time of actually making it up to the site. But we need to ensure that we grab these witnesses to start gathering information from them if possible. Also, try to use your PA system to herd or corral these individuals to one location so they are retained as witnesses, and you may have injuries among those individuals. So we need to try to manage that as much as possible. Immediate interagency communications and coordination and unified command is essential to a safe and successful response, and we can't address that enough. Also, clear communications is very critical to the response for effective and safe operations, and this does not mean by radio. We need to have good interoperable radio communications, but we need to have that personal face-to-face communications during that response, and that's one reason we need to have all response agencies in one command post. Also, when possible, if you have access to helicopters, a helicopter or other aviation asset is an excellent tool to provide you overhead security, safety, and assessments of the scene, but this may not always be an option in some jurisdictions. Responders need to recognize that some of these active shooter mass shooting incidents could turn into a hostage event. The majority of them will not, but in the past some of those situations have occurred. Also, most of these events, and this needs to be planned for, will occur during business or school hours because that's when the bulk and majority of the population will be in these locations. And you need to consider that in your planning considerations. Also, during past events, the issue of dealing with young students and young kids when you respond to these situations is young kids may not understand your instructions as a responder and have even hidden from responders in the past during past situations. So we also need to consider that and how to deal with those smaller children. If these situations turn into a hostage situation, this may turn into a prolonged response that will require fire and EMS to stand by for medical care, for fire suppression, or if law enforcement is deploying munitions, there is the fire hazard with that situation. So whether it's a mass shooting, active shooter incident, or it turns into a prolonged hostage situation, both those responses will require a fire and EMS response. As soon as an agency receives notification of a possible mass shooting or active shooter incident, we need to make sure that all agencies are notified, fire, EMS, and law enforcement, and we need to notify our support agencies, such as emergency management, who can respond to the scene and assist you with resources, liaison, coordination, and the media. Also, let's notify the hospitals as soon as possible, even if you don't have information on casualties, to prepare them, because in some past incidents, the first notification a hospital had of an incident is when the first load of casualties arrives, and that does not give the hospital time to prepare. So even with 5 to 10 minutes of notification, hospitals can do a lot of preparedness. We don't want to transfer the disaster from the scene to the hospital. Also, plan on a large and immediate media response. The media will be notified very quickly. They will be monitoring the situation and they will be on site. So as responders, as fire and EMS, you need to be prepared to address those questions. Once again, the media can be our best friend or our worst enemy. We need to address those media issues as soon as possible. They can be an excellent tool to tell family members and friends not to come to the site because that could be a big problem, and to put out other public information. Also, there will be lots of family members and friends coming to the scene of the incident, and we need to be prepared for that and plan for that situation. During a mass shooting and active shooter incident, fire and EMS personnel should wear their helmets and clearly marked fire and/or EMS jackets so they can be readily identified. Also, if there's any doubt that a responder is the appropriate response agency, you need to wear some type of road vest or a professional t-shirt so other agencies can identify who you are. If there's a large crowd of responders, we can identify who you are, and that the public can identify who you are when you're responding to that situation. This also applies to off-duty staff to law enforcement, fire, EMS management staff, to emergency management, to school officials. Some type of identification must be provided on the scene so the right individuals can make it to the command post and be in that scene. During a response to this incident, fire alarms and sprinkler systems have been initiated, so that can create additional noise and confusion and problems that need to be addressed. So at some point we need to be able to shut those systems down, because when the fire alarm is activated, it's very difficult to communicate inside of a facility. Also, a lesson learned from some past incidents is we need to monitor the windows of a location or a building that this incident is taking place for. There have been past incidents where victims and wounded individuals were in the windows of buildings and no one was monitoring the windows. Everyone was focused on the main entrance, have tunnel vision on the front door to a location. So we need to make sure we are monitoring the entire scene for situational awareness, and that includes all the windows, because you may be able to identify where there are victims at and other issues that need to be addressed. Also, one item of concern that you need to consider in this planning that has occurred with almost every mass shooting, active shooter incident in the past is responders will have friends or family members amongst the wounded or the dead or the victims, and this can create additional problems and issues for the response agencies. So this is at one time where you may consider using mutual aid agencies to come and assist you, because this incident will have a big impact on your community. During these type of incidents in the past, related and unrelated 911 calls will flood the communication centers, so we need to be prepared for that. Communication centers can bring in additional staff, and they need to be part of this planning process, because everyone from the media to family members may try to notify or make contact with your communication centers, and this can definitely create a burden on your system, so we need to involve them in your planning efforts. Also, when it comes to landing zones, if you have several medevac or air care flights coming into your site, you need to have someone who is trained and qualified to set up that landing zone and manage those aircraft. And the best choice may be to utilize a pilot, because he may have the radios and the terminology to safely operate with those aircraft. Because when you bring several aircraft into the airspace your incident, that can create additional problems. We want to make sure that goes smooth as possible if you're having to utilize multiple aircraft. Also, another consideration, your staging areas, your command post, your treatment and triage areas may need to be up to half a mile to a mile away from the scene initially during an active shooter incident, because that is the distance that rounds may be able to travel. So we obviously do not want to put our command post in danger and having it too close to one of these active shooter incidents. And this is part of us having to change our mindset that this is not the normal response, and you need to plan a little differently for these type of situations. The use of EMS tactical medics is strongly encouraged to support in this type of response. So if a fire and EMS agency does have tactical medics, they do need to train with the law enforcement agencies, and they may be the only responders allowed into the hot zone or the key site of this response to provide medical care, as we saw at Virginia Tech. They were the only medics initially allowed on the site were tactical medics. So the tactical medic program is an excellent program to have. Also, your business, your school, wherever this crisis is taking place, they will immediately activate their crisis management team, and you need to make sure that takes place and that you are able to meet those individuals face to face in the command post, because they will be able to provide you some key information, including that crisis kit that we have already discussed. Also, if you can only have access to a security officer, a school resource officer, that may be your best point of contact, your best resource for any type of location, because they will have keys, they'll be familiar with the layout of the building, and may have the right information that you need. So we need to get these individuals to your command post as soon as possible. Once again, we need to ensure that we have the right contact person from the jurisdiction or the location or the school that you have responded to for this incident. Whether it's a crisis management team member, a management staff, a school resource officer, a security guard, or any other type of individual, because they'll have the keys to the location. They may know the layout of the facility. They may know where the power shut off, the sprinkler system shut off is at. They may have the contact information for the crisis management team. Also, they may have the roster of the crisis management team if they're not on site yet. So we need to get that key contact person in the command post as soon as possible. Tactical medics may be the only medical personnel allowed in the hot zone or the warm zone to provide care for the wounded and provide medical support for law enforcement. Also, EMS may need to utilize scoop and scoot and load and go to get the victims out of the immediate danger area to areas of safe refuge. Also, you may need to establish casualty collection points, and those casualty collection points is a secured location where the injured can be brought to. This may be set up inside a school, this may be set up in the mall, or any other location where it's taking place. But this will be a secured area with law enforcement there where EMS can come forward and start treating and triaging those victims. EMS may also need to implement their disaster procedures, such as triage tags, casualty collection points, mobile field hospitals, and other type of procedures to deal with this large-scale incident. One key question that comes up is, when is it safe for a fire and EMS to enter the scene of a mass shooting or active shooter incident? This will always depend on the jurisdiction, on the plans, and on the situation. But a few basic guidelines are: only enter the scene if it is confirmed that the suspect or suspects are confined or neutralized. If it's a large facility and the suspect is confined to another end of the building, you may be able to enter from the other side of the building with law enforcement support to put out a fire, to remove those victims, to set up that casualty collection point. This will also depend on your local guidelines and procedures and training. If you enter into this environment, only a small number of fire and EMS personnel should enter the scene, because this is still a crime scene and you need to maintain those crime scene considerations. Additional law enforcement officers will need to ensure that fire and EMS responders do have safe passage and do have safe coverage while they're in the hot zone. Another point for EMS and fire is you can use healthy civilians and healthy victims to help move those injured civilians, because this incident can be very manpower intensive. You need to ensure that if you have a mass shooting or active shooter incident, that you activate your local emergency operations center. And this can be done through your emergency management office. This should be activated as soon as possible because of the long-term response, recovery, investigation, and support services that are required for one of these incidents. So we need to make sure that we activate that emergency operations center in a unified command setting, because we don't want to stand in the parking lot for 3 weeks to deal with this situation. That's okay for the first few hours of any type of critical incident, but as this goes on in hours and days and weeks, the EOC is a perfect location to try to manage and control the response and recovery to one of these situations. Also, another key point is that Joint Information Center, or a JIC. This is the location where we need to provide information to the media. And the quicker you can set up a JIC location, the quicker you can get the media there and start briefing them the right information that you want to get out to the public. This may be where you want the family members to go. This may be a helpline phone number, but we want to make sure we get that Joint Information Center opened as soon as possible. One important consideration that we've learned from past incidents: within days or even hours of a mass shooting active shooter incident, you may have VIPs that arrive on scene for various reasons. This can include presidential staff, vice presidents, attorney generals, governors, mayors, and you need to be prepared to deal with those individuals and be able to liaison with them, provide them the support and resources that they need. But they will show up sometimes within hours of an incident, and this does need to be a planning consideration. Some other options you can look at in assisting in your response is: 1, the establishment of a family assistance center. This may be established near the site at a remote location. This is a secure location where the friends and family members of the victims will go to get updated and current information. The media is not allowed at a family assistance center. Another option is a helpline phone number that will be established. This is a phone number that friends and family members in the media can call 24/7 to get updated information. This will take the stress off your 911 centers. Another consideration for your responders is your critical incident stress management, which will include stress debriefings for all responders. This will obviously also need to be done outside of the public eye. Well, we have a few options available on where we can go as the next step. I think the first one would be to reach out to your local emergency management office, as there may already be mass shooting and active shooter planning, training, and exercising efforts taking place, and we need to make sure that your fire department or your EMS agency is involved in those. So let's reach out to our local emergency management office. Also, there are exercises that take place regularly among the community. Let's get involved as an agency in those exercises, whether they're functional, full scale, or a tabletop, even in a support role or as an evaluator role. Let's get our agency a little more involved in these community-wide efforts. A third option would be to reach out to a high-profile business or a school in your fire EMS district. Even if your district has only one school or one high-profile business, reach out to that location. Make sure that they have their plans in place. Make sure that they're drilled. You're already in those locations for either safety visits or fire inspections. Let's take it to the next step and make sure they're addressing other hazards, such as an active shooter or mass shooting. And let's also make sure that we coordinate those efforts with law enforcement. One way we can build bridges is we may have to do that at the station house level, at the patrol car level. Reach out to your partners in the other agencies if this is not taking place at an administrative or management level. Example, when the police department, your sheriff's department, your tactical response team, your bomb squad is conducting training, offer your fire department to assist them. Offer to provide training to them, such as forcible entry, decon, fire extinguishers, breaching and breaking. Provide this training to those law enforcement agencies to start building those networks at a local level, at a street level. These interagency relationships are very important, and if we need to build those even at the social level by inviting law enforcement agencies to the fire station for our annual ice cream event, or if we're inviting them to our chili cook-off, let's make sure we build those contacts, we conduct that face-to-face networking, so when the incident occurs, it's not the first time that we have met. If an actual mass shooting or active shooting incident occurs, and it will, again in the United States, you need to be prepared as an agency to ask for that local and political support and interest that has not been there before to help you in your funding, your training, and your support for these type of incidents. Unfortunately, these type of situations may be a window of opportunity for you to better prepare the community for these type of situations. One option available to fire and EMS responders is to look for information on tactical medic and tactical medical support training. This training will provide information on such topics as active shooter response, rapid deployment training, weapons of mass destruction, buddy aid and first aid, tactical medicine, weapons of mass destruction. All this information will help you in your individual preparedness efforts and your departments and teams' efforts prepare for these type of situations. And it's recommended that you do some research at the local level to find out which classes are available locally. Please remember that this training video was for educational purposes only, and you do need to utilize your local guidelines and procedures. But if those guidelines and procedures are 10 years out of date, now might be a good time to go back and address those and update those plans. Each community should have some type of plan in place to address these events prior to them occurring. So the more our public safety agencies prepare for these events, the better they are prepared to respond to these when they occur in a safe and efficient manner. So it's important that we prepare now. Thank you very much and be safe.